Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Cardano and its native token ADA, and we're just going to be providing a general market outlook. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. There's a lot to discuss with ADA. We want to talk about it on its USD pair, its Bitcoin pair, and its Ether pair, and to see what are the most likely outcomes. I will remind you, my views on altcoins in general, again, they're not personal. It's just what I consider to be the most likely outcome. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about things before. But I do want to at least provide my views on it, especially considering that, we have maintained a fairly bearish view in general on the altcoin market as a whole for a bit over a year and a half now, and most of them are just continuing to put in new lows, right? Or sort of scrape at these lows that they've been at for a long time. And so what I want to do, again, it's just an exercise to show you why throughout bear market years and pre-halving years, staying away from the altcoin market in general often tends to work out better than YOLOing into every top just because someone says that, it's about to break out, okay? So the first thing we can say is that ADA has had a series of lower highs for quite some time, really since going all the way back to September of 2021. It's just been one lower high after another. And, it certainly brings a lot of people back in every time we get these rallies, but unfortunately, it hasn't really led to anything new. And what we were sort of talking about before is that it seems like we are about to enter into the depression phase. The last video I did on ADA, we talked about how we're likely entering into the depression phase. Now, one of the things to consider here is the depression phase arguably is sort of down here in this range, below that 24 cents level, which we are still technically above. So at this point, I don't actually even consider this to be a depression phase. I consider it to be, fairly normal for altcoins. I mean, if anything, this has been a more moderate drop that ADA saw last cycle. But again, perhaps there is some element of diminishing losses. But one of the things that I think is important to note here is that ADA is in this bad pattern where it's putting in these lower highs, showing no ability to get above the bull market support band. This wick here brought a lot of people back in. This was after the SEC and the Ripple case sort of finalized. A lot of people came back in there. And what's fascinating is how it basically retraced this drop, right? So, this drop started off at around 0.379. This wick went up to 0.0379. So, it just legitimately retraced this entire drop, only to then completely fade back down to the range lows. So the issue now that ADA is facing is it's getting squeezed, right? Because there's people that are trying to keep it supported here at around these prices, 24 cents or so, but it also is showing no ability to get back above the bull market support band. Every single time it tries, for the most part, over the last 2 years, it's had very little success, with the exception of early 2023. But again, you can see it was fairly short-lived, and it didn't lead to really anything that substantial. So the issue is that as the bull market support band continues to slowly come down here, something's got to give, right? So what I'm suggesting is that we should know the outcome of this sooner rather than later, right? Whether the bears are right, whether the bulls are right, we should know the outcome likely this year, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine that it'll just stay here, for the rest of the year and not make a decisive move. I think there will be a decisive move before the end of the year. I think it's going to be down. Other people think it's going to be up. I would encourage you to go listen to other views just so you're getting a well-rounded view on the matter. But that is what I think. One of the reasons that I still think it's likely to break down is because when you look at things like net liquidity, again, it has nothing to do with the fundamentals of any altcoin, but when you just look at liquidity, look at ADA. It just basically is tracking net liquidity here. You could even see pretty clearly, right? You have sort of a peak here and then a peak there. And then the same thing with ADA, right? A peak here and a peak here. Just like ADA topped out up here right around the time that net liquidity was topping out. So to me, it should not really be that surprising that altcoins are performing in this way because net liquidity is going down. Now, net liquidity here is being defined as the balance sheet of various central banks, including from the United States, Canada, the ECB, the UK, China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and we're subtracting out the TGA and the reverse repo. But again, you can see if we were to just simply overlay this up here, I mean, you can see just how closely ADA is tracking that liquidity. So a lot of people will come out and you know, they'll sort of pile on the criticism and whatnot. But I think the hard part for me is as long as liquidity is being drained from the cryptoverse, why should we expect a different outcome? That doesn't mean that altcoins will never have their, you know, sort of their heyday again. It just means that we're in that part of the cycle where they tend to bleed against the US dollar, against Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. So again, this goes to show really that fundamentals of a lot of altcoins are more so attached to excess liquidity than they are anything else. And I know that's not necessarily a popular view, but that is, I think, what is that view, I think, is the most likely one to sort of stand the test of time, right? And if you were to go look at you know, a chart here, let me go to ROI after, I want to go to ROI after peak if I can find it. So for various coins. So let's go look at this one really quick. And what I want to do here is just look at the top 25, but we're going to isolate just a few of them. And I mean, it really goes to show you that, you know, pick whatever one you want. They're all more or less down about the same amount. Some of them are down a little bit worse, like Polkadot and Avalanche, I believe, is still, you know, struggling quite a bit. Here it is. But you can see that it doesn't really matter what the narratives are for all these altcoins, right? They're all down, you know, more than 90%, right? At the current time, Solana's ROI from peak is 0.0834, ADA's is 0.0829, DOT 0.0685, and AVAX 0.068. They're all struggling. Now take a look at Bitcoin. It's way up here. So then where do the oversized gains come from the altcoin market? It's after all that liquidity comes back, and then the altcoins sort of close the gap. Think about how Solana closed this gap. It was mean reversion. So eventually when liquidity comes back, you might expect altcoins sort of mean revert back up higher, and that's where those oversized gains that a lot of people are looking for come from. Unfortunately, they do not come oftentimes in the pre-halving year. The altcoin market just simply gets wrecked. So when you go look at ADA USD, we have to be just reminded of the fact that it really is a function of excess liquidity. It's not something I control. It's not something you control. It's just something that we can observe. So when I look at ADA USD and I see that it keeps putting in lower highs and I see that it is trying to hold these lows, I just wonder how much more of this it can take before it breaks one way or the other. And again, I would expect it to break down, okay? And one of the things to look at closely is the bull market support band for ADA, which is currently at around 28 cents to 28.5 cents. So again, even if we were to get a pump, as long as we don't get any weekly closes above that, then it doesn't really matter. A couple of weeks ago, we got this pump by ADA. You know, it was about a 9% move in a single week, and a lot of people got excited about that. But you can see that we basically just retraced the entire thing. Look at the moves off some of these lows, right? Like this weekly candle here, a 19% move. This one here, a 12% move. This one here, a 9% move. So these bounces off the lows are getting weaker, right? They're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And we're also spending an increasing amount of time at these range lows. Right over here, we just wicked down to it over here. Now we're starting to spend a significant amount of time at these levels. So again, I still think the most likely direction for this to eventually break is down. It might be later this month. It could be next month. I don't really know. But that again is my expectation. If you were to look at ADA Bitcoin, the ADA Bitcoin chart, one of the things you'll note, let me actually pull it up. I think I need to click back on it. It's currently coming in at 918 Satoshis. Now, it should come as no surprise that my expectation is for this to break down. It's nothing personal with ADA. I just think the Bitcoin dominance is heading to much higher levels. We've talked about that a lot. And for a lot of the altcoins, it means that they're likely going to bleed on their Bitcoin valuations. Now, I will say a lot of people are hoping that this trend line holds. I will say that the people that are the most vocal about this trend line holding, not all of them, but some of them who have sort of said some things, they were also the same people who a lot of times said we would never go to 800 sats in the first place. Okay, so if you guys remember, what we talked about earlier this year was that ADA Bitcoin would likely go to 800 Satoshis sometime this summer and really spend the summer between 800 to 1200 sats. And that's basically what we did, right? We basically spent the summer between 800 sats. We didn't go all the way down to 800. I think we went down to about 850. And then we bounced back up to about almost 1200. So we basically spent the summer between 800 and 1200 Satoshis. Now, we've been holding this sort of macro trend line for a little bit, but again, it makes me think that this drop is coming. And if you look at ADA USD again, you can kind of understand where it might come from. This pattern, right? This pattern is something we have seen before, right? We saw it with Bitcoin last cycle, where it was basically just putting in these lower highs and trying to hold these range lows, and then eventually it broke to the downside. And it was a swift and decisive move, and it left a lot of us sort of scratching our heads. So when I look at ADA Bitcoin and I look at ADA USD, I'm like, well, if ADA USD broke down here, let's say Bitcoin rolls over and goes to like 23K or something like that, I don't know that Bitcoin can go to 23K without knocking ADA off this support. And if ADA gets knocked off this support, then, where's the bottom, right? I don't know. So that I think is sort of the thing we have to contend with, is if Bitcoin drops, which I think there's a good chance that it could in the coming months, especially considering that a lot of times in pre-halving years, we wreck the bulls and the bears, and the Bitcoin has seen 6 green months and 3 red months. I think we're probably going to see some more red months. By the way, right now Bitcoin is actually red for October. I mean, I don't know what it's going to close, but if you remember sort of going into this month, a lot of people were only talking about October, and it's actually down 0.5% right now. And ADA down this month 3%. Ethereum is down almost 7% this month, right? So this is certainly, at least at this point, this is not the month that I think a lot of people were hoping for. So, going back to ADA, I suspect that it will eventually break down. And if you were to look at like monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, we've sort of followed this pretty closely, I'd like to think. And we talked about back over here, we said that this is likely similar to this move, right? And then we said we're likely going to go into this phase, which we're in right now. And this phase really lasted until the end of 2019, till the end of it. So I'm still operating on a bearish bias for ADA at least through the end of the year. And then the following year, we ended up getting a recession, but that was just sort of a quick wick down, and then we came back up. So you can see over here that ADA USD is following a very similar pattern, right? Where it sort of tops out halfway through the year. This time it topped out a little bit earlier and then bleeds for the second part of the year. Seems like the same thing is more or less happening. And we still have a couple of months to go, 2.5 months for the rest of the year. And this is a pattern that seems to be repeating where, we sort of just watch ADA bleed into the end of the year. Kind of like what happened in 2022, right? Over here, 2018 and 2019 both sort of bled into the end of the year. 2022, 2023, I think both, just end up bleeding into the end of the year, just like, 2022 already did. I think 2023 is basically going to play out in a very similar manner, where it just continues to bleed into the end of the year. So when you look at ADA Bitcoin, I suspect it's going to break down here. Now, one of the things that you might actually be interested in is on a lower time frame, what this looks like. Because on a lower time frame, you could argue it's already starting that move. Like if you were to sort of connect the dots here, you can kind of see that ADA USD, or sorry, ADA Bitcoin, low, higher low, breakdown, back test, rolled over, right? So it kind of seems like it's in the process of breaking down. It's just a very slow process, right? It's an extremely slow process. And in the same way that the bull market support band, I think, could push ADA USD down, I think there's a case to be made that ADA Bitcoin could get pushed down by the bull market support band, right? So the bull market support band for ADA Bitcoin ranges from 1,004 sats to 1,053 sats. And ADA Bitcoin is now at 917 sats. So if you were to sort of extrapolate this, it's not going to take too much longer, you know, certainly before the end of the year, I imagine, before we're going to figure out which way this thing breaks. Again, I expect it to break down. Other people expect it to break up. Go watch other views just to make sure you're getting the full picture. I'm sure they have some compelling evidence to suggest otherwise. This is just my view. Okay. Now, the one thing that we've talked about for a while now as well is the ADA Ether valuation. And we've talked a long time about, you know, ones that bleed against the blue chips. At this point, ADA Bitcoin is still sort of in this prior range. Even if it dropped to 400 sats, it's still technically an oscillator. But the issue is with ADA Ether, you know, this kind of seems to be bleeding here. Now, I want to sort of remain open-minded at this point because we still haven't seen a whole lot, especially considering that I think Ethereum is actually very overvalued right now with respect to Bitcoin. And we already saw this month that Ethereum's already dropped like 6-7%. ADA's only dropped 3%. Therefore, ADA Ether is actually up slightly this month. You know, it's up, what, 3.75%. But I think the concerning thing is that if ADA Ether can't get back above this level over here, then it has the risk of being classified as a bleeder. Now, what's interesting is if you look at last cycle, you'll note that we actually put in a low here in October of 2019 on ADA Ether, and then sort of put in a lower low in sort of the April 2020 timeframe. This low here came in June. So, you know, you could certainly see this retest this trend line over here sometime maybe early 2024 or something. And if it does that, you might actually then expect some type of mean reversion back up to these levels. Okay, because even if it is a bleeder, which there's no guarantee that it is, but if it is a bleeder, you might still expect some type of mean reversion. So look, guys, I don't make the rules. I'm just pointing it out that this is a series of, you know, lower highs and lower lows on its Ether pair. Don't take it up with me. Take it up with the data. If the trend changes, I'll be one of the first people to note it, right? I mean, I will. But at this point, it just simply isn't. And we have to look at the data and say, this is what's going on. You know, I can't hide behind it. I can't say it's not happening. It is happening. And that's the issue, is that a lot of altcoins end up becoming bleeders against, you know, especially against Bitcoin. At this point, ADA Bitcoin still could drop 50% and still be well within the realm of prior, the context of history, right? So something to think about. Now, I want to sort of pivot over to some other things. So on the website here, what I'm going to do is we can actually filter this by the cryptocurrency, right? So I'm going to filter it by Cardano, and we're just going to take a look at a few of the charts. So one of them is the ADA dominance, right? So if you look at the ADA dominance, you can see that it really bottomed out last cycle at around 0.5%. Okay, right now it's currently at around 0.8% or so. Now, at this point, it hasn't taken out this low over here from late June, but there is a risk of it occurring. Again, the dominance could stay at this level even if ADA USD were to go down, if everything goes down sort of in tandem. But that, I think, is an interesting metric to look at, because you can see last cycle it sort of bottomed out at around 0.5% in August of 2019, and it basically hugged those lows through Q1 of the halving year for Bitcoin. So that's, I think, what you need to look at here is does it hold these levels through Q1 of the halving year, or does it just simply continue to break down? I don't know the answer to that. Again, this chart is different than the ADA USD chart. this could stay constant and ADA USD could still break down. But if ADA USD breaks down quicker than, you know, sort of the market overall, then the dominance could in fact go lower. So this is a chart I think it's worthwhile to at least consider it. Okay. Monthly returns. This is one of the things I've said many, many times, that DCAing into altcoins in pre-halving years is often a fool's errand. Not that they can't go up at all, but a lot of them just go down. And if you look at the ADA USD monthly returns this year, does this look like something that has been worthwhile to DCA? Again, honestly, I know some people that are watching this video are basically ADA maxis and they're looking for any reason to disagree with me or to put the analysis down. But if you are just completely if you can be unbiased for a minute, right, and you look at this chart, this table, and pretend it's not ADA, pretend it's some other random coin, and you look at it, and you tell me, does this look like something that was worthwhile to DCA all year long? Yes, we got a 59% move in January, and ever since then, it's mostly just been completely faded, right? Has it worked? We can go try it out. If we go to the DCA strategies page over here, what we can do is we can look to see exactly how DCAing ADA has gone this year. So, for instance, if you had started DCAing into ADA in January of 2023 and you DCA'd through today, and let's say you put $100 in a week, you would have invested $4,100, okay? So you would have accumulated almost 13,000 ADA. That's currently worth a little over $3,000. So despite the fact that you've DCA'd all year, or if you have, and it might certainly feel like you're getting a good deal at various points, your portfolio is down 20%, right? So it really goes to show that the more worthwhile thing to do this year would not have been to do something like that based on what we can see here. It would have been to say, well, you know what? It's often, if you're going to DCA anything in pre-halving years, it typically is better to do it to DCA Bitcoin, right? Because if the market goes up, it's only because Bitcoin went up first, right? The altcoins aren't going to lead Bitcoin in the pre-halving year, typically speaking. So again, even if you really believe in the long-term fundamental value of ADA or something, you could still be sort of look at the data and say, well, you know what? Maybe what I can do is, if you're going to DCA into something, right, DCA into Bitcoin in the pre-halving year, and again, this is sort of just looking at history. I'm not trying to give advice or anything, but like hopefully this sort of sits well with you for the next cycle, the next pre-halving year. But just to say, Bitcoin tends to outperform most altcoins. Therefore, had you DCA'd Bitcoin instead, you could always convert that Bitcoin to whatever altcoins you want later. You still reserve the right to experience the upside in the market in case Bitcoin goes up, while reserving the right to minimize your downside risk by not being overly exposed to the altcoin market. Okay, so DCAing ADA $100 a week for the I'm not even including 2022. We're looking at 2023 because a lot of people talk about how DCA is the way, and it's certainly true that if you only DCA'd at these lows, you're not really down 20%. But the reality is that a lot of people don't just do that, right? They FOMO in at these local tops, hoping that it's about to explode to the upside, only for it to come back down. So a DCA strategy for ADA this year has not been worthwhile. Anyone could basically, if someone were new to the Cryptoverse and they came in and started to DCA ADA right now, they'd be much better off than someone who started to do it at the beginning of the year. Even if you want to say, well, what about the staking rewards? That doesn't cover you, for a 20% loss, right? I mean, you're not getting that back on a 20% loss here. So something important to consider. Whereas if you DCA'd Bitcoin instead, you would actually be up, right? You'd be up about 7% this year if you had DCA'd $100 into Bitcoin every single week, as opposed to ADA. Again, guys, this is a process that we all go through, right? If you're sitting here thinking like, well, this, I don't make any sense, whatever. We all go through this process where, you get into the altcoin market, you think it's the next best thing, and you sort of scoff at Bitcoin because it's sort of just, no one cares about it or something. And then you just keep throwing your money in the altcoin, and it just keeps bleeding back to the US dollar, keeps bleeding back to Bitcoin. And before you know it, you're like, well, hell, I could have just put the money in Bitcoin and at least I would have preserved my capital. By putting it in all these altcoins, a lot of them have just gone down. So an important, look, it's an important lesson. And I'm not, I mean, it's a lesson that I have learned many times myself the hard way. So the purpose of these videos on ADA over the last 18 months or so was to hopefully prevent some people from experiencing the same lessons that I have the hard way. So hopefully if you sort of looked at the data and took some cold showers here and there, rather than getting too aggressive into the altcoin market, it would have saved you considerably, I think. My only goal was to help prevent people from making the same mistakes that I have made. I did not have any other motive, right? I just wanted to help prevent people from making those same mistakes. And I think, the proof is in the data, and the data shows that a DCA strategy has not worked this year for ADA. Now, you can come back at me and say, well, just you wait, right? Just you wait until it comes back. It's not the argument, right? I mean, it's still down a lot, and I still reserve the right to get into the altcoin market if and when I want to, but still recognizing that many of them can still bleed against Bitcoin during a parabolic rally by Bitcoin, because Bitcoin tends to lead the real bull market. Okay, so just an important consideration to make. One thing that I think that is maybe a worthwhile way to view this is to look at 1 over ADA Bitcoin. You can see that 1 Bitcoin today will fetch you about 108,000 ADA, okay? 108,000 ADA. In May, 1 Bitcoin would have only fetched you 72,000 ADA. In November of 2022, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you 48,000 ADA. In August of 2021, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you about 16 to 17,000 ADA. So this is the importance of Bitcoin dominance. Everyone loves to make fun of me because I talk about the Bitcoin dominance so much. But if you understood, how these Bitcoin dominance trends move over long periods of time, and you looked at how that could affect altcoins, you could have basically hunkered down in Bitcoin and waited, and then you could have always converted some of that Bitcoin to the altcoin that you wanted later on. You still reserve the right to experience the upside in the altcoin market, in the crypto market, by having exposure to Bitcoin, but you don't have the same downside risk that the altcoin market is giving you. So again, even if you go back to the beginning of 2023, even if you went over and said, well, what if you just YOLO'd everything in at the beginning of 2023, it still wouldn't be that bad. Maybe that's true, but at the beginning of 2023, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you around 57,000 ADA. Today, 1 Bitcoin gets you 108,000 ADA. So how can you argue against that, right? How can you argue against that and say, well, look, what has, you've taken on more risk by being in the altcoin this year. You could have taken on less risk and been in Bitcoin, and you could have converted and gotten basically twice as much ADA had you just done it that way. So that is the importance of Bitcoin dominance. It doesn't mean I'm a Bitcoin maxi or anything like that. That's just the importance of it, to recognize, there's various phases of the market cycle where altcoins outperform, but there's also phases where altcoins underperform. And in pre-halving years, most altcoins underperform Bitcoin. Most of them do. And ADA has been no exception, right? It has been no exception. You have to stick to the data. If you let the narrative rule, then you can get married to an altcoin, and before you know it, right, it's taking everything, right? There's other things we can look at as well. I think like the year-to-date ROI of ADA is kind of compelling to look at, because you can see there's a lot of different years here to compare to, because we've got data all going all the way back to 2018, but clearly there's one that it's mapping, following the closest, and that's 2019. So when you look at 2019 and 2023, what's fascinating is we're basically right where we were, in 2019 at this point, year-to-date ROI, and then you can see it still slowly faded into the end of the year. That doesn't mean there can't be another move up, right? There could be. We could go back up to, where we just were, right? That's always possible, to go back up to 26 cents or something. But the issue is that it doesn't mean that it's not going to eventually fade as we get further off into, the end of the year. And I think that is the concern here, is how do we escape this? It just seems like it's following this trend pretty well. I think it's likely going to follow it into the end of the year, meaning that ADA closes the year below its yearly open. In 2019, ADA closed the year about 20% below its yearly open. Okay, the yearly open for ADA this year is this price. It's literally this price, 0.246. So 20% below the yearly open, where does that put ADA, right? It puts it at around 19, 20 cents, about 20 cents or so. So if ADA were to follow the year-to-date ROI of 2019, which it has been tracking pretty closely, especially for the last 4 to 5 months, that puts ADA at around 20 cents by the end of the year, which is, again, it's a 20% drop. It's 20% below the yearly open, which is what it did in 2019. Okay, so you got to consider this stuff, right? And the people that, the people that sort of poke fun, I mean, they were doing it all year long at every lower high, and I still put forth this idea of how has that view been right? How has it been right? And what would convince them to think otherwise? You show them the ADA Bitcoin valuation. You show them how, being in Bitcoin was a safer play. You show them that DCAing the altcoin during the pre-halving year has not worked out. And it didn't work out last cycle either. I mean, if you held it long enough, sure, you can say that, all right, well, fine, it eventually worked out. But that's not the point, right? Investing is, timing is everything, right? Timing is everything. If you could have doubled up your ADA or tripled up your ADA just by sitting in Bitcoin for a year and a half, why is that not worthwhile? And just because something happened a certain way last cycle doesn't mean that it has to happen this cycle, but that is the point. And last cycle, even with ADA, because I DCA'd ADA last cycle, starting in Q3 of 2018. So that's where I started last cycle. And if I had a YouTube channel in 2018, you would have noted that I would have started DCAing ADA in Q3 of 2018. I saw this pretty massive drop. I saw it go up for the first half of the pre-halving year. I saw it completely retrace, put in a new low in the recession. And here I was thinking I was a genius, DCAing it throughout this entire phase, only to note that I could have just been sitting in cash, ignored all the volatility, and then just gone in when we got this capitulation candle over here into a recession. Now, again, had we not gotten that, maybe, you could have argued that this would have been better off, but I would still contend that even waiting until the end of the pre-halving year, right, December 2019, would have been pretty good, right? I mean, there was a slightly lower price in December 2018, but, sitting in Bitcoin that year as opposed to ADA would have worked out really, really well, right? Because in the pre-halving year of 2019, what you'll see is that going into 2019, one Bitcoin would have fetched you around 83,000 ADA, but then by the end of 2019, one Bitcoin fetched you approximately 210,000 ADA, right? So the point is, you could have sat in Bitcoin like in 2018 or in 2019. While it's true that I DCA'd ADA throughout this entire phase, I could have sat in Bitcoin and then doubled up my ADA just by sitting in something less risky, right? So, I mean, it doesn't mean that a DCA strategy for these altcoins can't eventually work if liquidity comes back and that altcoin doesn't become a relic. But if you could have doubled or tripled up your altcoin just by sitting in Bitcoin throughout the pre-halving year, I would think that would be worthwhile, right? That's my own personal opinion. At this point, we're pretty far into the pre-halving year. I'm not offering financial advice. I mean, if, at this point, the longer that people have waited, the riskier it becomes, because eventually liquidity comes back to the market and then the altcoins start to outperform. I don't think liquidity is knocking on the door just yet, but this is the issue, is that a lot of these altcoins just sort of bleed through the pre-halving year on their Bitcoin pairs. And I still think that ADA has this issue on its Bitcoin pair where it very well could bleed into the end of the year. Okay. So that's what I would, that's what I would more or less be looking at, right? Now, if it tops out here, right? If it tops out here and does not get that move, right? You can see over here it topped out at these levels and it sort of just hugged that level for a while. If it holds 800 sats, through Q1 of 2024, then you could make the argument that 800 sats could mark the low. But it's just hard for me to believe that's the most likely outcome right now, considering where ADA USD is and how it seems like it's just easily could break to the downside if Bitcoin just simply sneezes, by a couple $1,000s. Like, how does Bitcoin go down 2 or 3K without knocking ADA below the support? And if ADA breaks support that it's been trying to hold all year, where's the bottom? Right? So that, again, that's sort of the The issue that ADA faces is really not knowing, exactly where that low could be. I think we'll wrap it up there. There's a lot of other charts on here, and again, you can get, and these are all ADA charts, right? I mean, the thumbnails are not, they're for Bitcoin, but you can actually filter this by Cardano and go through and look at a lot of these charts and see what's going on. I mean, look at this one, drawdown from all-time high. It's a brutal cycle. We'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.